What's up? What's up? What's up? Columbia Crew Fantasy League back again. I'm here with my buddy Graham, and we're going to talk about the upcoming fantasy football drafts that we know everyone's preparing for. And tonight, we're going to focus on running backs. We're going to break it down by tier. Graham and I play in a PPR league, so we get points for receptions. So keep that in mind as we talk about this stuff. But Graham, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm excited for talking about the running backs. This is our first podcast. It's going to be for all the fantasy people out there. So it's not just Columbia Crew, but everyone out there who has a fantasy league. This is our first endeavor to reaching the masses. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. I spent some time today looking at all the running backs. Receivers so deep. We haven't hit receiver yet. Maybe we'll do that next. But running back had made me nervous because before I really looked into it, I kind of liked just like the top couple tiers, maybe the top 10 guys. But there's some stuff to look at in the later rounds, man. There's some value out there. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So no, both of us, we did our tiers, right? So I think let's go through each person's tier, kind of what you think, and an explanation of why you bunched them together, and then what we expect out of each player. And obviously, like, look, this all comes down to your draft. If you're the number one pick, you've got all the options in the world. If you're in a keeper league, you're going to have different options if you've picked up running backs. So clearly, this is up to your own league. But I feel like this is one of those things where we're going to give you the right resources, and we're going to tell you how we think about this in our league. So, yeah, go ahead, lead it off.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I think what we'll notice, I haven't really looked at your list. You didn't look at mine. We did our lists on our own. So it'll be fun to see kind of where we match up. And we thought about tiers a little differently, and we'll look at that in a second. But I think of tiers kind of by round in a way, like what round would I take this group of guys? And so in tier one for me, I thought of it as like, what running backs would I take in round one? Like if you're worth a top 10 pick, to me, you're in that top tier. And so I had three guys that I would roll the dice on in round one. And so I'll tell you who they are. First one's pretty obvious. Christian McCaffrey. He was a really top performer last year. He plays for a great offense, a great offensive mind in Shanahan. They spread the ball around, but McCaffrey can do it all, man. He catches so well out of the backfield. He's so fluid. He finished last year in the top 3 in rush yards, receiving yards for running backs, top 3 for evaded tackles last year, top 3 for touchdowns. He's just an all-around amazing back. And by the way, at least in our league, he finished with 405 total points. The next guy down finished with 302 total points. So there's a big difference there. Okay.
Absolutely.
And so he leads my tier one. I got two other guys in their tier, but I'm going to pause real quick because McCaffrey's special, and you tiered him in his own little group, didn't you? Like, how'd you think about him?
Yeah, good question. So I looked at this as, for me, the tier one was who's the most alpha of alphas, right? So this is ultra talented, high floor, unbelievable ceiling. Like this guy. So this is one of those things like, obviously, if you have a first pick in the draft, top 2, top 3, you just got to go here. He does everything for you. He gets the receptions a receiver's going to get. He gets the yards. He gets everything, and the offense is built around him. So I think that there's one guy in that tier one. For me, it was like there's one guy. I know we should have tiers should have multiple, but like this is a pillar. One guy you get, and after that, if you get him, like you said, that's 100 extra points over in our league over somebody else. So that's why I put him by himself in that top tier. If you're lucky enough to get first round pick, that's the guy you go with. Everything else you're looking at tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 type guys.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, in my top tier, my other two players are Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. I'll talk about them in just a second, but those to me are the top 3 running backs. And the way I'm thinking about it is not so much like last year in the finish, but where could these guys finish? And I think Breece Hall and Bijan have an opportunity to finish right up there with that extra 100 points. They both had reasons why they were a little behind McCaffrey last year, but I think this year their situation lines up so that they can compete for that top spot, which is why I kind of grouped them together because I'm looking forward, you know. And so let me talk about Breece Hall real quick. He's my number 2 running back. If McCaffrey went before me and I really needed a running back in round 1, I'd go with Breece Hall if he was available. He didn't really get full work until about week 5 last year because he had been injured, pretty serious injury he was coming back from. And even with the Jets' horrible offense last year, 29th worst offensive line and block win rate last year, he still finishes second with that late start and the bad blocking. And now this year, moving forward, they've completely revamped their O-line. They bring in a left tackle from Dallas and Smith. They've got a right tackle, Morgan Moses. They fill out the middle of the line. And so they've really spent some time in that. And if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy and that offense is clicking, I'm pretty excited about what Breece Hall can do. I mean, the guy's a home run hitter. He can do it all. So imagine, you know, if he can finish second on last year's Jets in points, you know, behind McCaffrey. Granted, it was 100 points behind him, but he finished the second in overall running back points in our league. I'm just excited about if this offense works this year, where he could finish. And that's why I think he could compete with McCaffrey for that number 1 spot. And then for me, Bijan, you know, finishes out my top tier because Bijan's just a generational talent. He does have a little competition in the backfield, but they started to phase out Algier a little bit last year. And Bijan, he's young. He finished top 5 in routes run for receiving, you know, for running backs and yards and targets and receiving touchdowns. A much better receiver than we anticipated. And we know he's a great runner. The guy's a beast. Atlanta's got that new passing attack, new receivers, new quarterbacks, new offensive system. Things should open up for him. So that's my top tier. Who do you have, I guess, in the top of your tier 2, you know, in running back spots 2 and 3?
Yeah, so I look at this as a 3-horse race. So I've got Breece Hall in my tier 2. I've got Bijan Robinson in my tier 2. And I have Jahmyr Gibbs. And I have it because these 3 guys, they're very similar in age. I think Breece Hall is more talented than Jahmyr Gibbs. But Jahmyr Gibbs is playing in a high-octane offense that we know will be a high-octane offense. Where Breece Hall, it's a hope and a prayer. It's the Jets. All the Jets fans know. You know, like all the Jets go 15-1 every August, right? And then the real season plays out, much like the Commanders and the Redskins. So I think that's why I put him in that same tier as Breece Hall. While he has a ton of upside, Aaron Rodgers is 39. Moses was basically cut by the Ravens and went to the Jets. So that's not necessarily an upgrade at their offensive line, even though he is new and their offensive line was pretty bad. And I think Bijan is going into a situation where you've got one quarterback who's got one leg in Kirk Cousins, and the other quarterback, Penix, who's had multiple knee surgeries. They're a bad hit away from being shut down. So while, again, he is ultra talented, that's a questionable offense there. What's going to happen? A new head coach, new offensive coordinators. You know, what can happen in that situation? So again, when I look at like these guys have ultra talent. But the other guy is close in talent, but Jahmyr Gibbs is in a great offense. I mean, this Detroit is going to score a lot of points, and Gibbs is going to be the recipient of a lot of those. I mean, this is a guy that last year, 5.2 yards a carry, 10 rushing touchdowns. He had 71 targets, 52 catches. So he's going to be a vital part of that Detroit offense, and that's why I had him in that second tier for me.
Yeah. Do you agree with me that you would take Breece Hall and Bijan before Jahmyr, or would you take Jahmyr before Breece and Bijan?
That's a good question. Really, this comes down to, I guess, how I'm feeling, because, you know, would I want to have the 1A back in a top tier offense, or the number 1 back in hopefully this offense gets better. You know?
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I put Jahmyr. He was almost in my top tier. He's the top of my second tier. The reason I drop him a little lower than Breece Hall and Bijan is because he's got David Montgomery there, and Montgomery got a lot of carries. I mean, Jahmyr ranked 25th in running back touches last year. Now, he's so explosive that he finished 10th in our league in running back points, even with, the 25th ranked touches. But he just goes off. He's only 22. And he spent 6 weeks inside the top 3 at running back, even with his limited touches. So his talent is unbelievable, Jahmyr. But with David Montgomery there, and Jahmyr Gibbs is currently dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury, which is those fast twitch, explosive guys can deal with sometimes. Those two things knocked him a little bit below Bijan and Breece. But I totally see your point with the offense in the Jets and the Atlanta not being nearly as good as Detroit. So it's I'm not going to hate anyone for taking Jahmyr right after McCaffrey,
Yeah.
But it's close.
I guess that goes into your second tier now. So in your second tier, you got your first tier, you've got McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Bijan.
Yep.
And now in your second tier, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor. So how do you lump those 3 guys together?
Yeah. So to me, I think about it in kind of in rounds. And, when I ask myself, if I'm in round 2, what running backs would I feel comfortable taking that I think would be of value in round 2 if I needed to take one then? And those are the 3 guys for me. Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Gibbs is probably going to go. There's 10 managers, 10 teams in our league. I think I can see Jahmyr Gibbs going on the turn at 11, maybe falling to 12 in that range. 10th is not a bad spot to pick because you can get a top flight receiver and then Jahmyr Gibbs on the turn. I mean, that would be great, right? If that happens. But I also really like Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor's situation. And, as a round 2 pick, Barkley obviously leaves New York in a really bad offense, and he goes to Philadelphia in a great offense. I know Philly faded a little bit last year, but I think that they've made a lot of good moves. They've bolstered their offensive line. They're going to have a great offensive line again. Barkley's running behind guys. I mean, the offensive line change for Barkley is going to be massive. He's got a dangerous receiving core, a dangerous quarterback that's going to open up lanes for him. I think we're going to see him thrive. I think he's a year away from his injury, over a year now. And so, Saquon's going to have a great year. That's just that. It's lined up for him to be the main guy there. And then right behind him, I have Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis because I really believe in Shane Steichen. He was the guy that kind of coordinated the 2022 Philadelphia offense, and he was a quarterback whisperer for Jalen Hurts when he was at Philly. Now he's at Indy. They've got a great quarterback coming back in Anthony Richardson, who I think is similar to Jalen Hurts in a lot of ways. And I believe that Indianapolis offense, while they don't have the receiving threats that Philly does or did, they're still going to be a great offense. And I think we saw in 2021, Jonathan Taylor just lead the league in everything. We know he's capable of that. I think he's still young enough to do that again. So I like Barkley. I like Taylor. I don't like them as much as Gibbs, but I like him in round 2.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had what I called in sort of my tier 3 was solid, but with running quarterbacks, right? So I put Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley in that tier. These are all guys that at any given time, Saquon Barkley's in the backfield, first and goal at the 3. Jalen Hurts takes a touchdown. Lamar Jackson, Baltimore, first and 3. Bootleg, touchdown. Jonathan Taylor, got the running back, quarterback situation in Indianapolis. So these are guys that if they came up, it could be the same guy. So these tiers are similar position, similar players, similar results in this. Derrick Henry last year scored 13 touchdowns. Gus Edwards had 13 touchdowns in Baltimore. Derrick Henry could have 20 rushing touchdowns this year in Baltimore, or he could have 5 and Lamar could have 10. Right, so you just don't know what's going to happen in the situation. Right. Obviously, with Saquon Barkley, great rushing attack in Philly, but they're losing their center and the other Kelsey, right? They're not dating Taylor Swift. So that's how I kind of bunch those guys together. Very similar in their style, similar in what they can do. But then that running back option could mean some weeks you've got 150 yards and 1 touchdown, or some weeks you might have 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think either way, if that comes up, if one of those goes and you're looking for that kind of player, it's a great position to one of those guys would be great for you to draft.
Yeah, I thought about Derrick Henry in round 2. I have some questions. I have him in my third tier as a third round running back, but I have him behind two guys. So as I look at my third tier, right before Derrick Henry, I still have Derrick Henry at the top of my third tier, but before him, I put Achane for Miami, and I put Travis Etienne right before Derrick Henry. I think Derrick Henry is a great fit in Baltimore. I think he just fits in with that culture. He's a little behind Achane and Etienne for me because he's 30 years old. He tied the league, for the amount of carries last season with Tennessee. But I agree with you. I think Lamar is going to open lanes for him. I think his offensive line is going to be good in Baltimore. Not as good as last year, but still very solid, top half of the league type of offensive line. And I think he's going to tear it up. He's not a huge pass catcher. He can catch, but not huge, which drops him a little bit below Achane and Etienne. For me, Etienne, talented guy, not super efficient, but he's the main dude in Jacksonville. He's going to get most of the work. He has a robust role there. He had the third most running back touches in the league last year. Although his efficiency needs to kind of turn up a little bit. But because he's the main guy, I have him a little bit before Derrick Henry. He's younger. I think Jacksonville's offense was kind of predictable last year. I think they're going to be better this year. And right before Etienne, at the top of my tier 3, I got Achane in Miami. He is similar to me.
7.8 yards a carry.
Oh my gosh, man. 7.8 yards a carry. Even though he missed 6 games with injury last year, he was still right inside the top 20 in terms of points for us last year. And he's got a super crowded backfield. But he's so explosive, man. He only got 12 touches per game because the backfield's so crowded. But he still finished with like 17 points per contest because he's just so explosive, very similar to Jahmyr Gibbs in that way. So yeah, that's the top of my tier 3. I got other guys in tier 3, but Achane, Etienne, and then Derrick Henry. Who do you have kind of in that next tier for you going into kind of the round 3 area?
Yeah, so like I said, my tier 3, I called that, solid, but with running quarterbacks. And then my tier 4, which kind of blends with maybe your tier 3,
Right.
call this the young backs in good situations. Like these are guys that are young, they're fresh, and they're in a great spot to have a good year. And that's Achane, Travis Etienne,
Yep.
Kyren Williams, and Pacheco. And these are all guys that are in situations where the teams are going to rely on them. They're going to get the rock. They're going to get passes. Like these are the studs. They're not the top alpha. They're not Breece Hall and Bijan, but they're in really good situations. And any given Sunday, they're going to have a great game because the game plan worked for them. And they were in that getting 20 carries, 5 or 6 attempts. I think that these are the guys I look at. Like Williams is young. I mean, this guy is overall he is 23 years old, 1,000 yards last year, 5 yards a carry, 12 rushing yards. I mean, this guy, 32 receptions, 3 reception touchdowns. I mean, this guy, he's a solid, right? It's a very solid player across the board. Obviously, aforementioned Etienne and Achane. But then Pacheco in Kansas City is a guy that just, again, great offense. Today, Patrick Mahomes threw a behind-the-back pass. It's such a creative team. And Pacheco was young. He's 25 years old, 7 rushing touchdowns. As Mahomes gets older, maybe he hands the ball off more at the goal line. We'll see how that works. But I feel like these are the guys that are young and they're in good situations.
Yeah, it's funny you say those names because those are exactly who I have after Derrick Henry in my third tier. I have Pacheco, Kyren Williams, and then I finished my third tier with Josh Jacobs. But Pacheco, he's catching more. Saw a big uptick in his receptions last year. He caught 44 passes as opposed to only 13 the year before. And so he's on the rise, man. And he's kind of the lead dog in Kansas City. It's a great offense. He's got Clyde Edwards-Helaire backing him up, but Edwards-Helaire is not the running back that Pacheco is. Pacheco runs with his hair on fire. I love him at Kansas City. He finished 15th in points in our league last year, and his work's just increasing each year. Also, Pacheco, 373 yards and 3 touchdowns throughout the playoffs on their way to the Super Bowl. So crushed it in crunch time and is very reliable. They love him there. Kyren Williams is interesting to me. It feels like a little bit of a gamble. LA, the Rams really leaned on him for the first time. It was his 4th year, I think, on the team last year, but he averaged 19 carries for the Rams. He got four catches a game. I mean, he was doing it all. He doesn't have the pedigree, but he's really grown into himself. He is a little bit injury prone. He missed 12 games in his first 2 years in the league, but he's got a nose for the end zone. Like I said, he's a good receiver. If he gets hurt, the Rams did draft Blake Corum, and they've got Boston Scott, who came over there that may steal some work, but that's okay, because even if they steal a little bit of work from Kyren, I mean, he was just so efficient last year. Finished 4th in our league in fantasy points. Kyren Williams, man. So he deserves to be up there, and if he stays healthy again, I think they're going to use him in the same way. And then finishing my tier 3, I'll just throw this out there. It's a name that you haven't mentioned yet. Josh Jacobs. He was only one of 5 running backs with at least 50 targets in each of the last 3 seasons. He's only 26 years old. We've seen him just, run like crazy when he was with the Raiders. He had a great year 2 years ago. Last year, he finished 2nd in touches per game. He wasn't as efficient. He's now in Green Bay. He's the main guy. Green Bay got rid of their number 1, and so Josh Jacobs comes in. He's going to be backed up by A.J. Dillon, who has looked good in the preseason. And Green Bay did draft a pretty explosive rookie, Marshawn Lloyd, out of USC, but he's got a pulled hammy right now. I think Josh Jacobs has a chance to say, look, I really am a top-tier guy. He's on a new team. He's going to be refreshed. They got a great offense in Green Bay. So, we love when we get skilled players on good offenses. Green Bay's ascending, man. So Josh is lined up for a good year. So I have him finishing my tier 3.
Yeah, no, for sure. I like Josh Jacobs. I think putting him in a really good offense. I mean, that offense is going to score a lot of points. Jordan Love looked great last year, and that just means that free safety, that linebacker, everyone's kind of backing up, looking for, the slants, the outs, the deep posts, everything else. And then you have a little draw play to Jacobs, who, like you said, he ran like a madman in 2022, 1,600 plus yards. I like, he's in my next tier with what I have. I'm a big Jacobs fan. I'm watching him at the Raiders, just the way he would run with such passion. And I feel like the Raiders had a couple years that last year, the year before, they had some, obviously coaching issues. Last year, quarterback issues. I think the new team, new face is really going to help him a lot. But I just want to go back real fast to the Rams. I think it's why I like Kyren Williams is same head coach, same offensive coordinator. Yeah. When I look at some of these players, if they're the same, the things don't change, they're making progress. I like that. Flip side, Josh Jacobs had a down year. Clearly, the team's not looking great. This change of pace could be good for him. So it all kind of depends on how you look at it. But sometimes that new scenery makes everything a lot better for these players.
Yeah, I have to admit, I boosted Josh up a little bit when I realized I feel like he's been around forever. And when I saw he's still only 26, like I thought he was maybe 28, pushing 29 or something. It feels like he's been around a long time, but 26 is right in your prime, man. So but yeah, it's he's an established name. Kyren's done it one time. Can he keep it going? Can he stay healthy? Can he commit to like doing this year over year? I don't know. We're going to find out this year. But the year he had last year, to me, I put him before Josh Jacobs, but they're close. Did you have anyone higher than Josh Jacobs that we haven't mentioned yet?
No, I think we're pretty close. I just have I'm in my tier 5 as with Josh Jacobs.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess I'll jump into that. When I look at my tier 5, and now I'm going into my second grouping. So my first grouping, I had my tier 1, my tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Those are all guys as they kind of come into your draft, and where do you fit? Where can you slot them in, right? So obviously, if you're a first round, you go for Christian McCaffrey. If you're later in that first round, maybe Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. Um, but my next group, I have my beta group, and these are guys that are going to be your RB2s. Especially if you went out on a limb and got a wide receiver one, maybe a tight end, you're like, oh crap, I need a running back. Who am I going to get? So my
Yeah.
tier 5 starts. I call these guys my new team, same back. Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, right? So those two players, we know what they've done. Like they're pretty consistent across the board.
Yeah.
Obviously, Jacobs had an off year, but we know what he can do. Joe Mixon, same kind of guy. We know what he can do every single year. Those are the guys. It's the same. Whatever comes up, if someone takes Mixon, take Jacobs, vice versa. I look at those guys as almost the same type of player.
Yeah.
Mixon, I think, is more of a workhorse, where Jacobs has more of the upside, but very similar across the board, what you might get fantasy.
Yeah. So funny you're starting your next round, so am I. And after I finished with Josh Jacobs, I start tier 4. And tier 4 to me is like running backs that you would select somewhere between the 5th round and the 7th round. And tier 4, the top 5 guys I have in tier 4 are Rachaad White, James Cook, Kenneth Walker, then Joe Mixon, and then Zamir White. That's how I looked at it. But to talk about Joe Mixon for a second, he handled a big load in Cincinnati last year, and he gets another fresh start. He goes to the Texans this year, and he gets to be the main guy there, and Pierce is going to back him up. But Pierce has shown he's not an RB1, so it's going to be Joe Mixon's show. And he's an all-around great back. He's getting a little bit older, but not too old yet. He caught 52 passes last year. I love that for PPR. We're talking Joe Mixon here. And the Texans got a great offense, man. We saw them explode last year, so he's going to be in a great situation. Kind of similar. He's in a similar boat to Josh Jacobs, Great back, a lot of experience, can catch the rock on a new team, fresh start. And again, he's got Pierce and Cam Akers playing behind him, but I don't think they're going to push him that much. So I like Joe Mixon a lot.
And I will say this about
Yeah.
both Jacobs and Mixon is because they're in teams with good offenses that are going to win a lot of games. That means a lot of fourth quarter handoffs. So just as you think about this, like if you get a top back and a team is losing, it's like Breece Hall, all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers goes down. Is Breece Hall going to carry the rock a lot, or are they going to throw? Whatever might happen, but for Houston's going to win a lot of games, 35-17, and that means Joe Mixon, left,
Yeah.
off tackle. So something to think about for your fantasy league. How do you want to stack your team in these positions?
Totally. I can see him wearing teams down at the end of the third as they're protecting that league, and maybe Pierce comes in at the end of the fourth quarter to finish it off. But Mixon's going to get a lot of carries there. He's coming off a quad injury right now. He hasn't played a lot in preseason, so I have him a little bit lower. I'm very sensitive to the older running backs kind of showing some injury signs in the preseason. It makes me nervous. So for my list at the beginning of my tier 4, I put Rachaad White up there, man. Rachaad White's I have him underlined, which means he's got no competition in Tampa Bay. He is the guy, right? And he's not as talented. He's a great running back too, though. He finished 6th in points in our league last year. No competition for touches. He's a good all-around back. There's nothing explosively special about him in any way. He just does everything pretty well, and so I have him, if I could get him in the 5th round, I'd be very happy with that. He's a solid, running back too. And right after him, I have James Cook. It's his 3rd season with the Bills. It's Dalvin Cook's brother. He's got good pedigree. He finished 4th in rushing yards last year. And when Ken Dorsey got fired and Joe Brady took over as the offensive coordinator in Buffalo last year, James Cook just flourished, just exploded, ended up finishing 11th in points in our league, had a great second half of the year. And he's the main guy. There's not a lot of competition in Buffalo. I have him underlined too, and I like that. So yeah. I don't think Buffalo is going to have the kind of offense we're used to seeing from them because they've lost some receivers, but they're still going to have a good offense. They've got a good running quarterback. They've got a good offensive line. I like James Cook right after Rachaad White. And then for me, right before Joe Mixon, I got Kenneth Walker because his breakaway speed is so enticing, man. He's going to have those games where he's got a couple like long runs. He was third in evaded tackles with 72 of them last year as he's breaking out of the line. Again, though, not hyper efficient. Even though he has those breakaways, Kenneth Walker, my downside for him in Seattle is that he does get hung up at the line sometimes. He only had a 4.1 yards per carry. He's got Zach Charbonnet, who I've always kind of had a thing for, backing him up. Charbonnet takes away some carries. And so Kenneth Walker is kind of like the 15 carries a game type of guy, 2 catches a game. He's not a huge receiver, but I just love those 75-yard runs that he has once in a while. He'll win some weeks for you. And he's young and explosive. And then finally, before I stop rambling, my top 5 in my tier 4, I got to talk real quick about Zamir White. He only did it for a month, okay? His last 4 weeks, at the end of last season, when Jacobs was hurt, he filled in for Jacobs when Jacobs was hurt for the Raiders last week. Those last 4 weeks, man, 4th in yards from scrimmage during that time. He rushed a league high 84 times in those 4 games. He's a classic power back at 6 feet, 218 pounds. And he is now the guy with Josh Jacobs gone for the Raiders. Are the Raiders a great offense? Not necessarily. But they're okay. They're good enough. And to be the main guy, and he did it so well in those 4 weeks, I'm excited to see what he can do this year. So that's my kind of top 5 in that next tier. Grab them in rounds, 5 through 7, rounds 5 and 6. Where do you have some of those names that I mentioned for the first time? The James Cooks, the Kenneth Walkers, the Zamir Whites. Where do they fall for you?
Yeah, so for me, I have that in like two tiers of that. So I've got what I call tier 6 is about like now or never. Basically, like, it's almost, for one thing, it's if you're drafting and you don't have another running back, get this guy now or live on the waiver wire, right? So Kenneth Walker the third, James Cook for Rachaad White. Those are my now or never. And also now or never, like, what can these guys really do, right? Now it's their time to really shine. Kenneth Walker, we've been talking about this guy for a while. We're waiting to see some consistency. James Cook, he's the man now up in Buffalo. Is Josh Allen gonna do the goal line runs? He's getting older. And Rachaad White, I mean, he's consistent, but like, can we see something else? But in Rachaad White's game. So that's what I have in my tier 6, and then that blends into my tier 7, which I call like my old and somewhat reliable. Right, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Aaron Jones. These guys, we know what Aaron Jones can do. Raheem Mostert, if he's not injured, we know what he can do. Kamara, I mean, he can do a lot out of the backfield. James Conner, he's had those games like, oh my God, James Conner, why did I pick him up? And you pick him up and he runs for 10 yards over the next 3 weeks. So these guys are old and somewhat reliable. So they kind of blend together in that. And as well as if you are looking for a back at this point in time, cross your fingers, good luck at this point. Just fill out your roster spot and hope that, sounds terrible, hope someone gets injured so that guy gets more carries. I mean, that's really what you hope for here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I don't want to have to pick Alvin Kamara. I don't want to have to do it, but he had 75 freaking receptions last year down in New Orleans. New Orleans offense is a mess, but they're going to be sometimes that's good for running backs, not in the rushing yards, but in the dump off passes. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so Kamara finished 12th in our league because of the 75 receptions. Now, in New Orleans, they do have Kendre Miller, who they drafted last year. He's lurking. Kamara has like a little nagging back injury right now. Again, those older guys, I track their injuries in the preseason. So I got my eye on Kendre Miller if Kamara goes down. Because he was drafted pretty high last year. But if Kamara's healthy, yeah, he's in that range. James Conner, same thing. Do I want to draft James Conner? They just drafted a rookie named Trey Benson, who they're excited about. Trey Benson is 6 feet tall, 216 pounds. He ran a 4.39 40. But every time I pick up James Conner, when I have to, he surprises me with his efficiency. He cleared 1,000 yards on the ground last year for a horrible Arizona team at his advanced age. So you can't sleep on him. He finished 17th in our league in points, you know?
At 5 yards of carry. I mean, this guy, this is
Yeah,
yards of carry in his whole, his whole career. That's why I like these guys are old and somewhat reliable. These are guys that,
totally.
you can count on them, but you're also going to say, like, you know what, there'll be some weeks where reliably they'll get you 10 yards on 15 carries. So,
Yeah,
we know what these guys can do. Same thing with Kamara. If he doesn't catch the ball, then what is he really going to be doing? So,
right. Did you mention Pollard is one of those guys in that group for you?
I did not have Pollard in that. I have Pollard in a later category.
Okay,
We'll get to.
fair enough. You said Mostert though, right?
I just say most. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
Mostert's
his.
up
I
there
love
because
his story. I love his
yeah,
speed.
he's 32 years old, man, and he Mostert from Miami. I mean, that's a crowded backfield, but he finished 7th in our league last year in points. He led the league in rushing touchdowns with 18 last year. It was his first time at 31 years old to crack 1,000 yards on the ground. But he's going to be pushed by, the player we already talked about,
Etienne.
Achane. He's gonna, I can't see Mostert having the same year he had last year. And they also drafted a guy that runs like a 4.240 at running back named Jaylen Warren. They still got Jeff Wilson there. They got a guy named Salvin Ahmed who comes in and like steals stuff randomly at the end of games. So that's a crowded backfield, but still, Mostert, you cannot deny the year he had last year. For me, in this group that you just discussed, I throw in Najee Harris. Not that he's super old, but he runs like he's super old. I mean, he runs like he's James Conner. You know what I mean? And he's in that classic timeshare. He's got, he splits carries with Jaylen Warren. But I have Najee right in this group because he's just a grinder, and he's got Arthur Smith now in Pittsburgh. He's consistently run over 1,000 yards, but he's declined every year the past 3 years. But to me, he's kind of right in this grouping of guys that you can rely on that do it year in and year out, but just aren't flashy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, with Najee Harris and with Arthur Smith, we know they're going to run the ball a lot. Obviously, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. I mean, this is a team that is going. I feel it's going to look like the 1950s football, where like every now and then they throw it. So when we get to our wide receivers, we'll talk about those and how the Pittsburgh receivers will be a stay away across the board until we see something. But with Najee Harris and Warren, it's really a coin toss of who gets it. I think Warren has a higher upside, and we'll see how it plays out. It might just come down to who Arthur Smith likes better. Something as stupid as that in this backfield.
Yeah. Again, these are guys I'm not going to be super excited to draft. I guess out of this group, the ones that I would want the most probably would be Mostert. And I have Pollard also. Pollard leaves Dallas. He goes to the Titans. He's in a running back by committee, but he's looked great in the preseason. 2 years ago, he was ultra efficient for Dallas. And then last year, not so efficient. So we don't know what we're going to get out of Pollard. If he can be efficient in the early downs, I think he's going to have a big season. And he can be explosive. He finished 14th in our league in points last year in Dallas when he was the main guy. He splits time now with it at the Titans and with Tyjae Spears. Yeah, I like Tyjae Spears a lot. He's just outside my top 30, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him. But I think it's going to be the Spears Pollard show. But right now, Pollard's listed as the RB1, so he's got a chance. So that closes out that rounds 5 through 7 type of group for me. And now I'm looking at like my guys to finish off, in rounds 8 through 10. Who do you have in your next group coming up?
Yeah, so after I went into the old and somewhat reliable, and now I work into like my third overall tier. And that starts with my tier 8, which I call RB3 land. So these are guys you're just going to have, they're going to be sitting there. You probably will never play them unless somebody gets hurt or a bye week. And that's Rhamondre Stevenson, Deandre Swift, and then Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. So I have them in that list where like, these are guys that you're going to start because someone got hurt or something else. That's what I look at this part. So like Rhamondre Stevenson, and DeAndre Swift, especially DeAndre Swift is basically backing up up in Detroit, so he might not get not a lot of play up there. Stevenson looked like he was going to be the man, then just fell off a cliff last year. He just did
Yeah.
not have a good year. I
Yeah.
don't know what happened, with that, but it just seemed like he was doing well, 1,000 yards in 2022, and then he went down. He was 5 yards a carry, then he went to 4 yards a carry. I mean, just
Yeah.
stopped playing well, and I'm not sure if that was an offense, a defense, injury. He's only 25, but that's a guy that I put him as an RB3. And look, he might lead the league in rushing because he's talented and he gets a lot of opportunity. Who knows? But I think he's going to live in that RB3 land.
Yeah, I have those two guys in this next tier also towards the top. I've got Deandre Swift. He's a dual
All right.
threat. He can catch, he can
Bears,
run.
Bears, not Lions. I got my.
Yeah, Bears. Dual threat for the Bears. I think he learned a little toughness in Philly last year when he was there. He needed to get a little tougher because he was a little weak when he was in Detroit, which is why they got rid of him, I think. But he learned some toughness last year. He's still explosive. But the problem is he shares time with talented guys like Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, in the backfield. But he did look pretty shifty. He looked pretty explosive when he took a swing past 42 yards in week 1 of the preseason last week. So DeAndre is up there for me in the next group. I agree with you on Rhamondre. I think the Patriots are just kind of a mess. And I think they're going to stay a mess for the next couple of years. They did draft, some young guys at receiver and quarterback, so that'll help. And for me in this tier, I've got right along with them, right next to them, I've got Aaron Jones and Brian Robinson. And Aaron Jones, struggled last year. It was his least productive season of his career. He missed 6 games with a hamstring injury in Green Bay. I think that's partly why they got rid of him. So now he goes to a division rival in Minnesota. And Ty Chandler, a good third down back, is kind of backing him up. And Aaron Jones has gone downhill the past 4 years, just lost a little pop each year. And that's not a good sign for running back. When you see that trend over a 4-year period, you can assume it's probably going to stay that way. But he is a dual purpose back. He can catch, he can run. And Brian Robinson to me is in this tier because, first of all, he plays for Washington. He's got Austin Eckler there now, who's going to be, vacuuming in any passes that come to running backs. But he's a great early down back. He's a grinder. He's 6'2", 230 pounds. He's a big boy. They're going to hand it off to him, when it's first down, when it's second down. But again, that's why he's in this tier. He's a good guy to put in maybe your flex, a running back 3, because he's going to be used a lot in Washington, but he kind of lacks some of that explosiveness. And then the last, well, I'll save. I'll move over to you. Where do you have Brian Robinson and Aaron Jones? Are they anywhere near this tier for you?
Yeah. So actually, I have Aaron Jones not anywhere on any tier. I have him in no tier.
Really?
Minnesota, I just don't want to touch that right now. Don't want to be close to that. Yeah, the backup quarterback's playing the entire year. Who knows? Jefferson's gonna want to run routes a lot. I mean, it's gonna be a really mess of a team. I have what I look at is I have my next tier, my tier 9 is the living on the waiver wire. So that is Zamir White, Brian Robinson, Javonte Williams, Chase Brown, Cincinnati running back. These are guys that are probably going to be tossed around like chips at a poker table. Just whoever gets them. We'll see what happens, right? These aren't guys if you draft them, great. But again, if you're looking to draft a player like this, you have to make sure that you're looking at, is there another position player available that I could take instead? Is there a rookie quarterback that I'd take a flyer on instead of this? Because Zamir White in any league will be dropped and added so many times. Same thing with Javonte Williams, Chase Brown. And again, unless people get injured and hurt, and that's almost why you have them here. You have them as a, break open in case of fire type thing.
Yeah. All right. So we were in pretty lockstep for our first, 3 to 4 tiers. But this is where I'm going to push back a little bit, because I think that some of these guys, and this is what I kind of realized when I did this exercise, some of these guys have a little bit higher ceiling than we want to give them credit for. Some more potential. I mean, they're down here for a reason, but we're in the low 20s now. And you talked about Cincinnati. Zack Moss replaces Joe Mixon there. And he's got a chance to be the guy there. And Cincinnati we have a bad taste in our mouth from Burrow being hurt all last year, and their offense kind of going off the rails. But if they can get their offense back, Zack Moss replaces Joe Mixon. Chase Brown, as you mentioned, is also there, kind of filling in some competition. But Zack Moss comes over from Indy, and when Jonathan Taylor was hurt last year in Indianapolis, Zack Moss played pretty well. He's never had more than 27 catches in a season, but he's a good all-around back. And so I think that if they have a nice offense, Zack Moss may surprise. Also in this tier, I've got the Jaylen Warren. In case there's an injury in Pittsburgh, Jaylen could have a high ceiling. I mean, you grab these guys, you put them on your bench, you see what happens, The other guy that I think has a higher ceiling than we want to give him credit for, and that's in this tier for me, is Jerome Ford. And I think he's going to take on a pretty high volume role until Chubb gets back. We don't know what Chubb's going to look like when he gets back. He had a devastating knee injury. He's not going to get back to probably week 5 or 6. You got a full month with Jerome Ford, who showed us last year in week 2, I think he led the league in rushing when he first filled in for Chubb when he was out. He came down to earth a little bit, but he's shown that he can carry the load. So I like Jerome Ford's potential. There's some guys here that could maybe surprise us in the Zack Moss and Cincy and the Jerome Ford in Cleveland. And even Devin Singletary, who's the only running back to really have any good experience. I know he's running for the Giants, and Devin Singletary is my 30th running back, so it's not like he's up there, but he's the only guy for the G-men right now. They don't have a good offensive line, but they did revamp their receiving core. They got one of the best receivers. Maybe they can turn it around. Maybe Devin Singletary does something. Maybe he's got higher potential than we think. We know he can catch the ball. I mean, it's got to be good for something. So he rounds out my top 30. Those are guys that could fill in on your flex week here, week there,
Yeah. Well, that's why I think for me, some of these guys, I really call it like living on the waiver wire, because it's going to be one of those things where Singletary, I don't even have him ranked in my top. But he'll come in on probably week 1, he'll do 10 carries, 30 yards. And then, he lives on the waiver wire. And then, you need a guy, you pick him up, and maybe he goes off for a few weeks. But, that's why they're going to live there. You're going to have them. You're going to maybe start them when they get 10 for 30 and bench them when they go 30 for 150. These are guys, and then you get mad and you drop them. So,
sure.
Yeah, I think that, I have it as, again, I guess my final tier, I'll kind of go over some of these guys, and I call this like my no floor, all ceiling, right? So these are guys that you get them, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's, again, Zack Moss is there. The dynamic Baltimore duo that's now on the West Coast, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. I mean, J.K. Dobbins is an amazing, talented player who cannot get out of the way of the injury bug. Gus Edwards, 13 touchdowns last year. Austin Eckler, as you mentioned in the Washington, he could have 50, 80 catches. Tony Pollard, same thing in Tennessee. He's got no floor, but the ceiling is unbelievable. And then Tyler Algier. Again, if Bijan doesn't do something, and Algier's right there, and then Nick Chubb, putting Chubb in there as well. We don't know what he's going to do. Yes, he can squat 600 pounds, but football is not squatting. Football is explosive, and it's difference between squatting and sprinting, right? So we'll see how that goes. But that kind of rounds out my tiers. I look at these. So as I mentioned, it kind of comes down to when you're looking at a guy, and these are things where say you have a Brian Robinson coming up in your draft, and he has a bye week, the same as your other running back has a bye week. That's when you go, oh, you know what? I'll take Javonte Williams instead, so I can have a guy on who's not in the right bye week. And that's where you sort of play the game on some of these things. Why I tiered them out that way. It's important to see that you can't have your number 1 running back have the same bye week as your backup running back.
Right,
those things will bite you, and if you're not thinking about that in those rounds, it's going to come back to you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The other thing I think about when we get down here in this area is for those of us that like to employ the handcuff method, you know what I mean? You're going to have Zach Charbonnet down here in case Kenneth Walker gets hurt, which he does, and then you've got the main guy in Seattle. You can get Tyler Algier, as you said, down here in case Bijan we know Algier, before Bijan got there, his rookie season, rushed for over 1,000 yards. He's a good back. So you can get him here. I like guys down here also, like Carolina. Chuba Hubbard. Again, he's kind of a poor man's Rachaad White, okay? But for the first month, he's going to be the main guy. I mean, he carried a heavy load last year. He's not a great player. He's not a good on a good offense, but he's going to get a lot of carries. You can get Tyjae Spears around here again in case Pollard gets hurt. You got the main guy, for Tennessee. Jonathan Brooks is the rookie running back for Carolina. He's the best running back out of college. He's not going to play really till around week 5, but he's hyper talented. He's worth a stash maybe, just to hold on to. In our league, we get to, pick some keepers. It's nice to have some talented rookies. If Jonathan Brooks blows up for Carolina in the last month of the season, it'd be nice to have him on your team. But this is kind of where you start thinking about, do I want handcuffs? Do I want to think about the future? Guys that you can kind of just, leave on your bench and see what happens. So, yeah, I mean, that's about 30 running backs we just covered, man.
Yeah, and I think that, one other thing to think about in this is like an Algier is trades. So if you get some of these players who are behind somebody who's doing well, trade. If someone gets injured, who gets bumped up on some sort of on a depth chart. So there are a lot of other things kind of go into this. This is the reason you take some of these guys, even though you might want to say, well, is Zamir White really going to play a lot? Well, trades and injuries. So this is like why you do draft, because things do happen. And like you said, I think look at Jonathan Brooks. There weren't that many running backs drafted. Jonathan Brooks was in the second round. Trey Benson in Arizona, and Blake Corum at the Rams.
Yep.
From Michigan. And this guy, I think looking at these rookies, knowing that, especially if you're in a keeper league, if they take off and have a good season, you're doing pretty good. Now, Blake Corum's 23. That's a guy who probably will play a little bit more than, say, like Trey Benson, because he's 21. A guy who's more filled out, got a couple more years under his belt, played for national champion Michigan. So those are things to look at in these later rounds. Like, how savvy can you be in this? Or do you go like, I'm taking Justin Tucker instead? I'm going to get the kicker in round 10.
Good stuff, man. Yeah, I'll send you. I think you have my list of my tiers, and maybe we can put up some graphics as we have this conversation by tiers and kind of compare our tiers. But I think we were pretty close. Top 20 guys, fairly close. I really, again, there's some good talent at the top. There's some decent talent in the middle. It's not as deep a situation as the receivers are by any means. So get some good running backs while you can, because they're going to go quick. They're going to go quick.
Yeah. Yeah, and just remember, if you're watching this, no matter where you are, that we clearly are the experts on fantasy football. We have championship trophies to prove it. We are clearly the experts you should be listening to, and no advertising, even better. So
this is the only podcast you need leading up to your draft.
That's right.
Good stuff, man. Well, it was always fun. Next time we'll hit receivers. That's going to be a lot more work, I think, because it's so deep. But it'll be worth it. It'll be fun, man. And had a great time, dude.
This is great. All right, Jesse.
See you next time, buddy.
Okay.